Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless Official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Mitch never imagined that the day would come when his entire world would come crashing down, and then, miraculously, be rebuilt again through one devastating, tear-filled revelation. For years, he'd carried the ghost of a daughter he thought he'd lost forever, a child ripped from his life by lies, deceit, and the cruel twists of fate that seemed to follow him like a shadow. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment when he realized that the young woman he had unknowingly mentored, comforted, and protected from afar, Claire, was the very child he'd mourned decades ago. The discovery left him trembling, his voice cracking, his eyes filling with tears that spoke of both heartbreak and salvation. It all began with a letter. A faded, yellowed envelope that had been buried deep inside a box of his late mother's belongings. Mitch had only opened it out of curiosity, but as soon as he read the words written in his mother's familiar cursive, his entire body froze. The letter revealed that years ago, during one of Mitch's most reckless periods, when his life had been spiraling after his wife's supposed death, his infant daughter hadn't actually died in that tragic hospital fire as he'd been led to believe. Instead, she had been secretly whisked away by a family friend who believed Mitch was too unstable to care for her. The friend, acting out of misguided love, had given the baby to a distant relative under another name. That name, scrawled in ink that had faded with time, stopped Mitch's heart: Claire Grace Whitmore. Claire. The woman who had recently walked into his life as an ambitious young intern at the community foundation. The same Claire whose eyes reminded him of someone he used to know, someone he had buried in his heart long ago. He remembered how she carried herself with that same quiet resilience, how she challenged him in meetings but softened when he smiled. He had even told her once, jokingly, that she felt familiar, like family. Now the truth behind that uncanny connection hit him like a tidal wave. When Mitch first learned this truth, he couldn't breathe. He dropped the letter and stumbled backward, clutching the edge of his desk as tears began to blur his vision. All those years, the sleepless nights, the unanswered prayers, the guilt for not being able to protect his child, came flooding back at once. His hands trembled as he tried to process the impossible. Claire, the woman who had unknowingly become his emotional anchor, was the daughter he'd thought he'd lost forever. The weight of it all sent him collapsing into his chair as sobs racked his chest. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was redemption, shock, disbelief, and the kind of love that shatters and heals all at once. He didn't go to her right away. For 3 long days, Mitch kept the secret buried in his chest, afraid that one wrong move could destroy both of them. What if she didn't believe him? What if she resented him for not being there? He spent nights sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at old photographs of his late wife and the tiny baby girl they once held, the baby who, he now knew, had grown into a strong and beautiful woman right under his nose. Every time he saw Claire at work, his throat tightened. He wanted to reach out, to say the words that had been burning inside him since he found that letter, but the fear of rejection silenced him. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't in the calm, carefully planned moment he had imagined. It happened during a stormy night at the foundation, when everyone else had left the office. Claire had come back to retrieve a forgotten file, and she found Mitch sitting alone, staring out the window at the rain. He looked haunted, the kind of haunted that comes from a lifetime of carrying secrets too heavy to bear. She asked if he was okay, her voice gentle, her concern genuine. That was all it took. The floodgates opened. Mitch turned to her, his face pale, his eyes shimmering with tears. Claire, he began, his voice breaking, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you the moment I realized it. She frowned, confused, stepping closer. You remind me so much of someone I lost a long time ago. Someone I thought I'd never see again. My daughter. Claire's expression softened with sympathy, until he said the words that changed everything. You're her, Claire. You're my daughter. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Claire's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face as she took a step back. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. Mitch's tears fell freely now, He pulled the letter from his jacket pocket and handed it to her with shaking hands. "I found this, from my mother. She knew. She kept it from me all these years. You were taken from me, Claire. You were given a new name. But you're her, my little girl." Claire looked down at the letter, her hands trembling as she read the words. When she reached the part where her own birth name was revealed, Clara Mitchell Harper, the reality hit her like lightning. She remembered flashes of her childhood, her adoptive mother's odd reluctance to talk about the early years, the strange way she had always felt like she didn't quite belong. The puzzle pieces began to fall into place, and the truth was undeniable. She looked up at Mitch, her own tears spilling down her cheeks. "All this time, you've been my father?" Mitch nodded, choking on a sob as he reached for her. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your dad. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped searching, even when I thought you were gone." He paused, his voice shaking. "I missed your first steps, your birthdays, your life. I missed everything. And I am so sorry." The air between them was thick with emotion, decades of pain and longing suddenly erupting into the open. Claire didn't move at first. She just stared at him, the man she had looked up to, trusted, and admired, now standing before her as the father she never knew she had. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The dam broke. Mitch let out a sob so deep it came from the very core of his soul. He clung to her like a man who'd finally been given back the one thing he thought was lost forever. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, father and daughter reunited at last. The rain outside continued to pour, as if the heavens themselves were cleansing away the years of separation and sorrow. When they finally pulled apart, Mitch gently cupped her face in his hands. "You have her eyes," he whispered, referring to his late wife. Claire smiled through her tears. "And your stubbornness," she said softly, and they both laughed, the sound fragile but full of hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotion. Claire struggled to come to terms with her new reality, torn between gratitude and confusion. Her adoptive family had loved her, raised her well, but now she had this new truth to reconcile. Mitch, meanwhile, couldn't stop replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He kept finding himself staring at old photos, trying to see if he could recognize the young woman Claire had become in the baby he once held. He even visited his wife's grave, telling her through tears, "I found her, honey. I found our little girl. She's alive." For Mitch, the discovery was both a miracle and a reckoning. He realized that life had given him a second chance, not just to be a father again, but to heal. He had spent years burying his emotions beneath layers of anger and guilt, but now he allowed himself to feel everything. The grief for the years they'd lost. The joy of knowing she was alive. The pride of seeing the kind of woman she had become. Claire had inherited his passion for helping others, his fierce loyalty, and his drive to make a difference, but she also carried her mother's warmth and compassion. They began rebuilding their relationship slowly. Sunday dinners turned into heartfelt conversations, where Claire would ask him about her mother, and Mitch would share stories, some funny, some painful, about their family's past. They visited old places together, piecing together fragments of a history they were both trying to reclaim. There were still moments of tension, moments when Claire would question why he hadn't found her sooner, and Mitch would struggle to find the right words. But through it all, the bond between them deepened. The community soon noticed a change in Mitch. The once gruff, emotionally distant man now smiled more often. He seemed lighter, as though a lifetime of burdens had been lifted from his shoulders. When people asked what had changed, he would simply say, "I found what I was missing." And Claire, for her part, began to see her own life through new eyes, realizing that the pieces of herself that had always felt incomplete were finally whole. One night, months later, Mitch stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights with Claire beside him. The night air was cool, the world quiet around them. He turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think I was being punished, that losing you was the price I had to pay for all my mistakes. But now I see it differently. Maybe fate was just waiting for the right moment to bring you back." Claire smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Maybe it was waiting for us to be ready, she said softly. And in that moment, with tears in his eyes and his daughter by his side, Mitch finally felt peace. He had spent a lifetime searching for redemption, and he found it not in success or forgiveness from others, but in love. The kind of love that defies time, distance, and loss. The kind of love that can't be broken, no matter how many years pass or how many lies stand in its way. For Mitch and Claire, the discovery that had begun in heartbreak became the beginning of something extraordinary, a second chance at family, at healing, at the kind of connection that only a father and daughter can share. And as they stood together beneath the fading stars, Mitch whispered the words he'd waited decades to say, "I love you, my little girl." Claire smiled through tears and whispered back, "I love you too, Dad." In that quiet, perfect moment, the past no longer mattered. The pain, the loss, the years apart, all of it dissolved into the single, overwhelming truth that they had found each other again. And this time, nothing would ever tear them apart. The revelation that Mitch was her long-lost father had changed Claire's world forever. But as the initial rush of emotion settled, reality began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. The truth, as beautiful as it was, carried consequences, ones that rippled far beyond her and Mitch's reunion. There were questions that begged for answers, loyalties that would be tested, and hearts that would inevitably break. While she finally felt whole for the first time in her life, Claire also knew that she couldn't keep this secret hidden from the people who had raised her, the family that had loved her as their own. The thought of facing them, of telling her adoptive parents that the man she had come to know as her mentor was, in fact, her biological father, terrified her more than anything. For 2 days, she avoided the conversation entirely. She went about her routines, pretending everything was normal, but inside, she was a storm. At work, she would glance across the office and find Mitch watching her with quiet affection, and her heart would ache with conflicting emotions. There was joy, yes, but also guilt. Every time he smiled, she thought about her adoptive father, Thomas, who had carried her on his shoulders as a child, who had been there for every scraped knee and broken heart. And her mother, Lila, who had tucked her in at night, whispering prayers of protection. How could she tell them the truth without breaking their hearts? Mitch, meanwhile, understood her turmoil more than she realized. He had been cautious not to pressure her, giving her the space she needed to process everything. But one evening, when she came to his home to drop off some files, he gently brought up the topic that had been lingering unspoken between them. "Have you told them yet?" he asked quietly, his tone tender rather than demanding. Claire looked down at her hands, fiddling with the hem of her coat. "Not yet," she admitted. "I don't know how to even start. They've been my parents my whole life. They loved me. They gave me everything. How do I tell them that my real father just showed up?" Mitch's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Sweetheart, love doesn't disappear because the truth changes what we know. They'll still love you. You're still their daughter. You just have another father now, one who's been missing you his whole life." His words made her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this truth would somehow bring them all closer instead of tearing everything apart. But deep down, she feared what honesty might cost her. That night, Claire drove to her parents' house, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. The drive felt endless, the streetlights blurring into streaks of gold as tears threatened to spill. When she finally pulled into the driveway of the home she'd grown up in, she sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the familiar front porch. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letter, the same one Mitch's mother had written, now folded neatly in her bag. Inside, the living room was warm and welcoming, just as it had always been. The faint scent of Lila's lavender candles lingered in the air. Her parents were sitting on the couch, watching an old movie, but as soon as they saw her, their faces lit up. "Claire. What a nice surprise," Lila said, getting up to hug her. But the moment her mother wrapped her arms around her, Claire broke down. The tears she had been holding back came pouring out as she clung to Lila like a child. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Thomas asked, standing up, concern flooding his voice. Claire pulled back, her face streaked with tears. I found something out, she said softly. Something about my past, about who I am. Her parents exchanged a worried glance. Thomas stepped closer, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. What do you mean, honey? Taking a deep breath, Claire reached into her bag and handed them the letter. You should read this. The room was silent as her parents read. The color drained from Lila's face as she reached the end of the letter, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas blinked several times, his eyes widening with disbelief. Claire, he whispered. Are you saying that Mitch Harper is your biological father? Claire nodded, her voice breaking. Yes. He found me. He didn't know. He thought I died, Dad. His mother lied to him. He found that letter after she passed away. Lila sat down heavily on the couch, tears glistening in her eyes. Oh my God, she whispered. All these years, we never knew. Thomas paced the room, running a hand through his hair. His emotions warred between shock and heartbreak. We thought we adopted you legally, through your mother's cousin. She told us your parents were gone, that you had no family left. His voice cracked. We never would have taken you if we'd known your father was alive. Dad, I know, Claire said quickly, her voice trembling. You didn't know. None of you did. And I love you both so much. You're my parents, you always will be. But, he's my father too. I can't ignore that. Lila stood, her eyes full of love and sorrow. We could never stop loving you, Claire. But this, she trailed off, looking toward Thomas. This changes everything. It's going to take time. Claire nodded, her tears falling freely. I understand. I just needed you to know. For a while, the three of them sat together in silence. The television flickered quietly in the background, forgotten. Finally, Thomas put an arm around his daughter. You've always had our hearts, he said softly. But maybe it's time we make room for one more person in the family. If Mitch wants to know you, and if you want to know him, then we'll stand by you. The words broke Claire all over again, but this time it was from gratitude. She hugged them both, crying harder than she had in years. She knew it wouldn't be easy, there would be pain and confusion, but she also knew she was loved, unconditionally. When Claire told Mitch the next day that her parents knew, he exhaled a shaky breath of relief. They took it better than I feared, she said with a soft smile. Mitch's eyes glistened. You deserve that kind of love, sweetheart. I'm just grateful they gave it to you when I couldn't. What neither of them anticipated, however, was how quickly the news would spread through the small town. In less than a week, whispers began circulating, about Mitch Harper's secret daughter, about how he had hidden her all these years. The rumors twisted the truth until it was barely recognizable. By the time it reached the ears of the town's gossip queen, Marilyn Dorsey, the story had evolved into something scandalous, that Mitch had abandoned a child and then suddenly claimed her to gain sympathy. Mitch tried to ignore it, but when he overheard people talking behind his back at the cafe, calling him a liar, saying he was trying to rewrite history, his blood boiled. Claire, meanwhile, was torn between defending him and retreating from the spotlight. The tension came to a head one afternoon when she walked into the cafe and heard two women whispering loudly near the counter. I heard he's just trying to clean up his reputation, one said. After all those business scandals, suddenly he has a daughter? Please. Claire's heart pounded. She turned toward them, her voice steady but cold. That's enough, she said sharply. You don't know what you're talking about. The women turned, startled. Oh, Claire, we didn't mean. Yes, you did, she interrupted. You're talking about my father, the man who lost me because someone lied to him. He's not perfect, but he's been through hell to get me back. So maybe show a little compassion before spreading more garbage. The cafe went silent. Claire left, her hands shaking, tears burning her eyes. When she told Mitch what had happened, he hugged her tightly. You didn't have to do that, he whispered. "Yes, I did," she said, her voice fierce. "Because I know who you are, and I won't let anyone drag you through the mud for finding your daughter." That moment deepened their bond even further. Mitch saw in Claire not just the little girl he'd lost, but the strong, brave woman she'd become, someone who would fight for the people she loved, just as he once would have for her. As the days turned into weeks, the town's initial shock began to fade, replaced by curiosity and, eventually, acceptance. The local paper even published a feature about their reunion, painting it as a story of forgiveness and family rediscovered. People who had once whispered now smiled at them when they walked by together. But perhaps the most emotional moment came when Mitch and Claire visited the grave of her mother, the woman Mitch had loved and lost so long ago. The sky was soft with evening light as they stood before the headstone, hand in hand. Mitch knelt down, his voice trembling as he spoke.